Yeah. So my favorite way of seeing wisdom is part of the what's called the DIKW model. It stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I think we've done podcasts on this, like a couple. I've at least mentioned it many times, and I think we did an entire episode on it. And data, information, knowledge, and wisdom are different types of content that we engage with. Data is basically the easiest way to understand it is ones and zeros, like little bits of
letters in the
information.
alphabet.
Letters in the alphabet, right? Like numbers and math equations. Like think of that as data. Then when you start organizing data, then you end up with information. So you take those little bits and then you organize it.
CAR, car. Now I've got the word car out of 3 pieces of data, C, A, and R.
That's right, exactly. Or I've taken all of these little bits and I've turned them into lines of code. And now they can be, now they can turn into software or something. So information organizes data to make it useful. If I start applying the information I have.
Mostly labels it.
Oftentimes can.
Yeah.
But information is oftentimes labeling or trying to communicate concepts.
Naming, labeling, things like that.
Articulating. When we start to apply that, though, and we play it out in real life and we find a practical application for it, then it becomes knowledge. Now it's not just bits that are running in my head or organized in my head, but now I've watched myself do it. I know it. I think the word knowledge is really good because oftentimes knowing feels like it's a whole body experience.
It's experiential. This is what we do a lot of work around here at PH, Personality Hacker. We're trying to get people from just labeling information theoretical to applying it, make it operational, and then now you know what this feels like. You know, you have knowledge about how this shows up for you specifically in your life.
Yep, exactly. And if you do that enough, if you apply something often enough, eventually knowledge gives birth to wisdom. And wisdom is doing something enough so that you know when, say, the rules don't apply, right?
Yeah.
And I've mentioned this in a recent podcast because actually Dan Dodge, who's been on quite a few episodes before, he's the dude that does hiking, in case you remember previous episodes he was on. He said, my favorite is of the difference between, information and knowledge and wisdom is knowledge is knowing that Frankenstein was not the monster in the book. And wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein actually was the monster in the book. And I thought it was great. Right? Because Dr. Frankenstein. Said. Yeah, Dr. Frankenstein was the actual monster. And I was like, that is such a fabulous one. So thank you, Dan. I'm swiping it. Yoink. So wisdom is when it's when you've applied something often enough, you start to realize where the rules of the theory start, they really break down. So when we talk about the wisdom of a function, what we're talking about is knowledge that has been called through experience.
Yeah.
And enough experience so that you are at a place where you not only know it in your body, but you also know when it doesn't apply anymore.
Yeah. So from a meta standpoint, then I'm just writing down some qualitative, like the qualitative nature of wisdom and the words like we talked about discretion, being able to make distinctions earlier. I also have the idea of responsibilities in here. There's a responsibility to things. Like I'm just tuning into like my digestive system. If I was wise about it, I'd be responsible to it. I wouldn't just eat pizza every night and expect to be healthy. There's also stewardship. Understanding there's like, when I say stewardship, it's different than possession or ownership. I mean, like, in a way, I think wisdom realizes you can never own anything. Like you're not really an owner, but you can take on responsibility to steward things. And I think that's wise, right?
Yeah.
And then experience and context are the other 2 words that I've written down here as well. So these are some, and as we build this list, I'm going to, if a word comes up or some qualitative nature, I'll bring it up when it strikes me. I'll be like, oh, I just added another word and we'll add it to the list.
All right.
Do you have any off the top of your head that I immediately missed that you're like, oh, it's so obvious, it needs to be on the list, Joel?
No, I think that's a good working list of characteristics that one could apply to wisdom.
Maybe what we could do too is to break down the word wisdom to its etymology as well, just to make sure we have a working knowledge of that. Then let's jump into the functions.
Yeah. So that one's easy because I think I just said it. So wisdom is wise and dumb together. And wise, not dumb, D-U-M-B, but dom, D-O-M, like kingdom, right? And
like a domain or a state of being or position. It's positional.
Right.
Yeah.
So wisdom is knowledge through experience, right? It's a knowing that you get by basically, yeah, it's like the learning you get by having done something and taken all the licks, right?
Being in state.
Yeah.
Like being in the state of doing something, you learn a lot and you get that
No, that's
wisdom.
the Dom part. I'm talking about the wise part.
Yes.
Wise is learning through experience.
Yes.
And then Dom, like kingdom, is a condition or a state.
Yeah.
So you smushed them together a little early. But that's okay because that is what it is. It's like it's the condition or state of just knowing something because you've lived it.
Yeah.
So that's wisdom. And so when you talk about the wisdom of a function, we're not talking about just using it. We're talking about having applied it so many times that it's now communicating to you knowledge as a state or a condition. Like it's almost like I am this thing almost.
Yeah.
Right. Or I've gained a bunch of gifts from it. So I recognize its importance and value.
And on the last episode, we also talked about giving to the function too. This is a little bit of a deeper concept, a little bit more nebulous, and it's a little new for me, quite honestly. But this idea of the map and the territory are different. So the territory of a cognitive function, let's say one of my preferred functions of introverted feeling or authenticity, we assume that we have mapped the entire territory of all the things that personality cognitive function could take into account, the mental function could take into account. But I don't think we have. I might have an experience in my life that adds to the body of knowledge of what we know introverted feeling or authenticity can do. Like I might be the first person to activate an aspect of this, and I get to now add to the collective knowledge that we have through my activation, my experience of something, to increase the wisdom that we have for this as a kind of a collective in a way.
Yeah.
It's super deep and nuanced in a lot of ways, but this came up on the last episode and I went, well, that's exactly how it works. Like every usefulness, every time I operate personality type, every time I'm healthy and I tune into the wisdom of this, I'm furthering the knowledge and the understanding and frankly, the energy signature of what this function takes up in the world. Again, that's pretty abstract, but hopefully you can get what I'm saying when I say that.
Yeah. Well, because you're the only one using it in the way that you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that already expands it. And then we also mentioned that we kind of get this idea that we are exclusively influenced by the function.
Yes.
Like if I have certain type preferences or function preferences, then it's almost like I have to obey them. They're telling me what to do. And so they'll show up in a predictable way because of that. But I actually think that we're influencing our cognitive functions just as much as they're influencing us.
We're not at the mercy of them, is what you're saying.
And we get to flavor them. They take on new form with our interpretation of it.
That's what I mean. Like the point before that was there's ways we haven't even used these yet that someone's going to invent or use them in that capacity in some way that will be furthering that function's use for everybody.
That's right.
Is that what I'm saying? Like it's like someone will get even more accurate than accuracy has been to this point and be able to further the function's territory it can take in.
Yeah.
And the wisdom that it can give us.
Yeah. I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more, but I think I understand what you're basically saying.
Yes.
So there is use, which is the standard use, and then there is wisdom, which is the called learning from repeated use. And repeated use is important. The reason why people with it as a preferred function as either their dominant auxiliary or the driver and co-pilot, the reason why they're far more likely to get to wisdom is there is a bravery that we have. And I wouldn't even call it bravery because bravery indicates that you're scared of something and you do it anyway. We have almost like we have what other people would call a bravery around our dominant or driver function because we're just using it. Even if it hurts us, even if we end up failing miserably with its use, we have such a high degree of certainty in the function that we're going to use it. We're going to use it even if it's the wrong tool for the job. We're going to use it and we're going to humiliate ourselves with it, and we'll get back up and dust ourselves off and do it again and do it again and do it again. And that's actually how you get wisdom. You get wisdom by doing things failing and then learning the right lessons.
Yeah.
So that's why we're most likely to tap into the wisdom of the function when it's one of our first two, because we have a sense of, we don't throttle ourselves. We just go for it.
So what I hear you saying then is if somebody activates this part of themselves just by the sheer number of reps they're doing.
Yeah.
How many times you activate this, it's kind of like seed just scattered on the ground. And one of these is going to take. You're going to get something to grow. You're going to learn something. You're going to get wisdom just because you're doing it so much.
Right. Exactly.
Now, I would, though, posit that just doing it a lot, well, that can happen. That doesn't guarantee it will. And also there's more proactive, more conscious ways to take control of these processes to purposefully go toward wisdom, not just have it happen accidentally through use, but to proactively attune to it and attempt it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think when a person is into something like, say, personal development or personal growth, which I've multiple times on the podcast defined as accelerated maturity, which is another way of saying, wisdom, right? Maturity and wisdom are very related. If you want to become a better version of yourself and you're actively trying to do that, you're probably going to get to wisdom a little faster because you're paying attention, right? You're like aware and paying attention. And I don't mean like you have to know type. I just mean that we tend to become wiser in the tools that we're given when we are focused, like when we see the advantage to growth and see the advantage to accelerating our maturity. And growth and accelerated maturity almost always means doing hard things.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to grow if you're not doing a hard thing. It's kind of like the psyche mirrors the body in that way. It's like you're not really going to build a lot of muscle if you're not lifting something that's heavy for you.
Yeah.
So it's the same way with the psyche. And we tend to lift heavier things with our first two functions because we feel like we can handle them. And so it doesn't, but like you said, it doesn't mean that we absolutely will tap into the wisdom. There are certain people who have more, like they have more will towards growth. They have more will towards doing hard things, and they're going to call the wisdom of those functions faster.
Yeah.
But we all have an opportunity, and we're less likely to do so with the lower functions. We're less likely, we're going to throttle ourselves with more uncertain functions. And if we end up using one, I see this happen a lot when somebody starts to try to integrate their 3-year-old or inferior function. They start using it and it doesn't work out for them. And the thought isn't dust yourself off and do it again. The thought is, oh, I knew it wouldn't work out.
Yeah.
And so they tend to stop doing it, or they tend to like really kind of narrow what they're willing to do in that function. And then they go, well, I'm integrating my 3-year-old or inferior function. And then they'll like name like one thing that function is doing. And I'm like, well, that's your comfort zone with that function. So I don't think that's exactly growth and development. That's not exactly calling the wisdom of it. But it's because we get really afraid of, or we just feel so uncertain with all the other aspects. And if it hasn't worked out, well, we knew it wasn't going to work out. And then that just reinforces why we're not going to do it anymore.
I think one thing that if you're listening, watching right now, you can immediately reframe when we say get out of your comfort zone. What you could really just immediately translate to yourself. Anytime you hear that to yourself, go, get out of my certainty zone.
Yeah.
Get out of my certainty zone.
Yeah.
Get out of my certainty zone. That's really what we mean by get out of your comfort zone.
Yep.
And that can be a positive certainty zone. Like you can get out of a uncertainty that's it's not like it's all negative, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's not like every time you're out of your comfort zone, it's going to be extremely tough and you're completely ill-equipped and you're going to fail miserably and it's going to be awful and it's just hard work and it's a bunch of failure. No, sometimes getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of your certainty zone is going for something positive and you actually win at it and it's good and it works out and you feel good about it and you wanted the thing, right? Like going for things that you want is also getting out of your certainty zone.
Yeah. The challenge with uncertainty is that if it turns out well, you think it's an anomaly. And if it turns out poorly, you were right the whole time.
I knew it the whole time.
Yeah. And that's the challenge I think that's a great way of saying it, my certainty zone.
Yeah.
And so it's harder to call the wisdom of functions that fall out of our certainty zone, for sure.